And I use the example of Yasser Arafat. When Yasser Arafat signed the peace treaty with Israel in 1993, the Oslo Accord, people in the Arabic world were stunned. They would ask Yasser Arafat, who we in the West look at as a nationalist. He's not a radical Muslim like we would look at Osama bin Laden, or a conservative Muslim like we would look at the royal family of Saudi Arabia. But when Arabic press would ask Yasser Arafat, how could you sign a peace treaty with the Jews? He would tell them, have you forgotten about Hudaybiyah? When the Egyptian press would ask him, how could you sign a peace treaty with the Jews? He said, listen, the Prophet Muhammad signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So while we in the West didn't have a clue as to what Yasser Arafat was talking about, the Jews were singing Kumbaya in Jerusalem, having Peace Now movement. We were so proud in America that we broke the peace treaty between the Palestinians and the Jews. Yasser Arafat was singing in Arabic, Jihad, 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 all the way to Jerusalem, and quoting the Treaty of Hudaybiyah to the Arabic press, who knew exactly what he was talking about. And what Yasser Arafat was referring to, that Muhammad used lies and deception as a strategy of war by signing a contract with his enemy until he is strong enough to declare war on them again. And Yasser Arafat was using this tactic to defeat Israel, his enemy. He not only was able, because of that treaty, to go back to Israel, to go back to the, Palestinian territories and establish the Palestinian Authority, he even got the Jews, got Israel, to pay for him to come back, to finance his troop, to train his police, and supply his police with weaponry that the Palestinians actually used against Israel later in 2000 when they broke their peace treaty and started declaring the Second Intifada and suicide bombing on Israel. This is how the Prophet Muhammad set the example of how wars should be fought. We in the West had no clue. Most of the people still do not have a clue as to what we are truly fighting. We need to stop differentiating between this is a nationalist, this is a radical, this is a conservative when it comes to Islam. We need to realize that deceit is a tactic of war when we are dealing with radical Islamists. Everybody knew that Yasser Arafat was a thug. Just because he put a suit on and came to the White House did not make him a respectable world leader. So, Islam spread out of Arabia. Islam started conquering nation after nation, led by Muhammad. He himself fought 27 battles as a military leader. And they started conquering the neighboring areas, Christians and Jews. And they started forcing the Jews and the Christians to become dhimmi, conquered people, even though protected under Islam because they are the people of the book. But they became dhimmi, and they became persecuted under Islam as a second-class citizen. And the Jews and the Christians, in order for them to stay alive, they had to buy their protection by paying the jizya, the protection tax. And the way the Jews and the Christians paid the jizya is by going to the mullah, kneeling on their knees downtown in a ceremony, and handing up their money or their taxes to the Muslim mullah in subjugation. And the way the mullah took the money from them, he used to grab them by the beard, the Christians and the Jews, hit them on their chin as a reminder of their submission and humiliation, and take the money. In a lot of areas, Jews and Christians were made to wear a receipt around their neck to show that they have paid the jizya. Churches were not allowed to be built. Christians and Jews were not allowed to worship out loudly. And this is how they lived peacefully under Islam. And this went on. Prophet Muhammad died, the caliphs that followed him started spreading Islam throughout the world. Nation after nation, they started conquering continents, and they took over Jerusalem. And this is what launched the Crusades. People think, why did the Crusades were launched? The Crusades were out butchering and killing people in order to take over. It was in the 9th century when the Pope in Rome spoke to the Christians in Europe and said, how could you live like this, looking what's happening to your Christian brethren, that they are being killed and subjugated. Many Christians were converting to Islam because they were not able to take the persecution that they were facing. So the Pope in Rome said, you have got to get up and fight. You have got to go liberate Jerusalem. Look what the Muslims are doing to the Christians in Jerusalem. And this is why the Crusades were launched, to go liberate Jerusalem. And they were able to liberate Jerusalem for less than 100 years, until Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi was able to go back and retake Jerusalem, kicking the Crusaders out. And for 300 years, the Crusades tried to fight Islam and failed, to the point that after 300 years, they gave up and completely disappeared. And Islam continues to rule. At one point, Islam covered more of the earth's surface than the Roman Empire covered at its peak. We sadly in the West neglect to study history, could care less about history. We are not teaching our children history. We blame ourselves for everything, and we refuse to study the facts and see what is happening and why it was happening. And this is when you hear Muslims say, well, Christians and Jews lived peacefully under Islam. Yes, they lived peacefully as subjugated dhimmi, protected under Islam by buying their own protection. And as Islam spread out of Arabia and covered many countries across the globe, anybody who is a non-Christian and Jew who is protected by the law of dhimmi, because the people of the book were forced to either convert or die. They couldn't even buy their protection. This is why we saw the massacring of the Hindus. Unless you were a Christian or a Jew, you were killed, period. By the time everything is said and done, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but this is how Islam spread. It took until the 1600s, until the European Revolution, Industrial Revolution, that gave Europe the money and the industrial advancement to develop tools, to develop weaponry, to have the money in order to advance and retake back and liberate lands that Islam has conquered, like Spain and like the many countries that they have conquered. It wasn't the Crusades that were able to liberate Christian lands conquered by Islam. It was the European Industrial Revolution, which created a job, which created things where we manufacture things on a factory line where the Muslims could not compete. And as the Europeans grew, and as the Europeans developed new technologies and new weaponry, they were able to advance and sell their products at a much cheaper rate than the Muslims. And as they liberated Christian lands conquered by Islam and dominated by Islam, the Islamic community began to become poorer and poorer and poorer. Because what built Islam was the money, the jizya tax, that they were able to take from the Christians and the Jews, and the credits that they were able to take of the advancement of the Christians and the Jews. So when that money line dried up, you started seeing the deterioration of the Islamic power and the Islamic strength and the Islamic wealth. And this happened in the 1600 centuries. And it wasn't until now, until 1924, until Ataturk ended the Islamic empire. Most people don't realize that. It has been less than 100 years since the end of the Islamic empire. And when the Islamic empire ended in Turkey, this is when the Muslim Brotherhood became enraged and formed in Egypt in 1928, shortly after Ataturk, which the Muslims term as the Jewish agent because they despise him for giving women freedom, for doing modern things in Turkey. They call him the Jewish agent who ended the Islamic empire. And so the Muslim Brotherhood was formed in Egypt in 1928, the oldest terrorist Islamic organization in the world. We were not paying attention. We cared less. We didn't want to know anything. It didn't bother us. It was over there. The Muslim Brotherhood brags about its 70 offshoots worldwide. Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hizb al-Tahrir, Jama'at al-Muslimin, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, you name it, are all birthed of one point or another out of the Muslim Brotherhood. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the second man of Al-Qaeda, came out of the Muslim Brotherhood.